Hello and welcome to another lighting diagram lesson. My name is Trenton Hoshiko, and today we're talking about The Guitar Player by Jean Baptiste from 1757. If you've been here before, you already know this, but if you want to get my free lighting diagram tools template, which includes everything up here already made so that you can just get started diagramming either from your own reference images or based upon a set that you're going to be using, that template is available completely free. You don't have to sign up. You don't have to do anything on my Patreon. Patreon.com/TrentonHoshiko. The direct link to that is down in the video's description. While you're there, if you do want to sign up, I do have free and paid tiers. Those paid tiers help support these lighting diagrams as well as my regular cinematography lesson videos. And as usual, if you end up liking the video, please do give it a like down below. That really helps me with the YouTube algorithm. As usual, let's start with talking about the image itself before we start diagramming. I think what catches my eye with this is distinctly the pose that the subject is in. He's in this very animated position as he's tuning, and he has his leg kicked up and he's looking over and he's making eye contact with you as the viewer. And I think that's really great. And I think the second thing is the light is different than a lot of these paintings that I do here. This is not a really top down, from a high up window kind of light look for this. If we look at the shadow that's right behind him on the guitar itself, almost going bottom up, we're getting like a little bit of the top of his shadow right here. By and large, I would say that this is almost just straight across from him onto the guitar. Like I said, it goes up a little bit, but accounting for different things, you could have it be a little bit lower, a little bit higher. But by and large, that's straight across. And I think that's really cool. It's very different to have your subject be almost directly in line with it. And oftentimes we talk about that in terms of, does that flatten it out? If this was behind the camera and also in line like this, it would flatten out. But because it's from an angle off to the side of the camera on the right side, we aren't getting that flattening. It's creating that shape to it. And this light is pretty hard. It's not perfectly hard, but it is quite hard. And you can tell that by the shadow, like right here, where the edge of the guitar is being wrapped around his leg and you get a pretty crisp line. Similarly, we see the shape of the guitar body and him on the table right here. And I'm just kind of circling these as the evidence of how hard this light is. And his shoulder is being cast onto the guitar right there. You can see this almost 90-degree angle right here where the light is passing by him in terms of his face and his shoulder and creating that shadow shape on the guitar. And that shows how we are getting that light to be coming basically straight across. Like I said, a lot of paintings that we do, the light would be, up here coming down as some sort of higher up window or a large window source. This to me feels hard, so the sunlight is coming directly in. I mean, it's 1757. We're not talking specifically artificial light here, although there, potentially could have been artificial light and embellishment or something of the sort. But let's just talk about this is a window with sunlight coming through it, and that sunlight is beating hard onto our subject. Now, at the same time, our shadows are not completely blacked out, although they are a little dark back here. So we are losing some fidelity, but we don't have a total loss of texture. And even over here where there's some junk on the floor and birds that he's probably going to eat later or something, I don't know, and stuff falling, we're not losing all of that detail. There's some ambient nature to it. And this shadow right here on his leg isn't incredibly dense. The guitar one is a little bit denser probably. And there's probably an aspect of this that is the, brightness of his outfit, that bright white stocking. But we also don't have that incredible density. So we need to have some fill light coming in and bouncing around the room. Maybe, these walls right here are just light enough to actually create some bounce overall in the room. Now, this is the other thing that's interesting. It almost fakes as if the window is higher up because of this angular, slash, basically. For me, what we're going to do is we're going to use some barn doors to create that. And then kind of lastly, the note about hard light. As I've talked about many times in other videos, I can even link some of those down below. We're using hard light to capture detail and shape our light specifically for this fabric. Like, look at this like cloak he has on, this blue, this vibrant blue cloak, and look at the shape of the shadows on the folds of it. Once we get the light trapped in there, there is no escape, and instead we have dark and light patterns as it folds and ripples, and I think that that's something that's really gorgeous. And then you get the same thing from even his sleeves, and the texture there is clearly different than his, you know, jacket vest thing right here, and his pants and the shawl. All of those are different textures, all absorbing the light and being shaped by it in different ways. We can tell the angle of the light also by the lack of shadow along his foot here. We do get a little bit of shadow from his shin side, where that light is basically coming right to left. His shin is slightly shadowed. There's basically no wrap to it. And then that is in line with how his shoulder and face would be blocking the guitar itself. But another quick note about this back here is we have this diagonal line. We're going to have to use something to create that shape, but it's kind of faking as if the light is higher up and being shaped more, and it gives more interest to the background. If this was just going in and we had an exactly perfect, you know, horizontal line that basically lines up with the frame or whatnot, it wouldn't be as interesting. This kind of acute triangle of light keeps our eye focused back into his face and this whole area. Basically, our main focal point is his face, his hand, his other hand, you know, his legs even kind of bring our eye back to him in the middle there. So kind of our main goals are hard light, some shaping to that hard light, and some fill. And the rest of it really is positioning and understanding how that hard light is going to affect your scene and the shape of the fabrics. I love using hard light to grab texture and create shape, especially for things like fabrics. I don't think the corner of the room is here. I think the corner of the room might be more here. It's not exactly clear, but you know, we have a little shape here, and this is what we're going to go with. The room itself is slightly ambiguous, especially because of how the streak of light comes in. This very well could be the corner, or this could be the corner. If this is the corner, then that streak is coming across the wall corner edge and bending, which is cool in its own right. I'm not going to build it that way just because I don't want to. So we'll get ourselves a table and we'll put it in a corner kind of like this. He's sitting against the table just like that. And we have our camera going right there so that we can get this kind of half on angle with the corner-ish of the room being somewhere between here and here. And he's at the table right there. Something like that. Let's just, for the sake of things, put a chair underneath him as well. And we have to, of course, rotate it because he's kind of closing his body to the camera through rotation, but he's opening his face towards the camera. And that would be seeing the back corner right there. Yeah, I think that's about right for the camera. Now, we're assuming that there's a window in this room. That's what would be creating this light for the reality of this. But for this painting, it's actually much more unmotivated, and it's almost this spotlight look, which I think is really interesting. It gives this sense of performance to our subject here. And I think that's what makes this kind of so powerful and feel so relevant to our modern world, is it looks like a spotlight on this guy who has this charismatic pose performing or preparing to perform with his guitar. You can almost hear the lively strumming coming from him, even as he's tuning it. Maybe he does it with style and flair, and that's part of his personality that can come across to us as the viewer. So we want this to look like a spotlight. So we're going to take a Fresnel lamp, and that's to help us get our light to be even harder than it would be otherwise. And we're going to make a light path that kind of goes somewhere like this. And we want it to go all the way across his desk, somewhere to right about there. And the more that I look at this, this might very well be the corner. So if I just have that extend out a little bit, that's probably fine. And we want it to go all the way over until about here on the front edge of the desk. But it actually streaks a little bit further even. So we can just kind of go like this. And that would give us about 30 degrees off of the original angle of the camera, which helps us make lighting look natural and not like it's flattening out our image. We're going to put some barn doors on that. That barn door set is going to help us shape this light. We're going to rotate those slightly and then use that to cut this angle. If you don't have barn doors, you could use a flag. If you don't have a flag, you could use a piece of poster board or something of the sort to just help make that angle like this. We want that streaky nature to it because that's what helps us sell this spotlight. The focus is being physically narrowed so that it lands mostly on him. And keep in mind, this light needs to be almost underneath him. It's very strange. It's very strange for me to say that with a description of one of these paintings because it's so rare that the light is so exactly horizontal and creating this look. I mean, this is almost like this caught in the moment, like he's surprised to see you. He's caught in the spotlight look, which I think is, like I said, really powerful. And so the lamp that we're going to use for this, I think could be as not powerful as something like a GVM P80S or an SD80D, both lamps that I really like from GVM. You could use probably pretty much any aperture lamp for this. We don't need this to be particularly powerful. We're not lighting up a huge scene, and especially because we have some fill light that we're going to bring in, but we need these hard shadows. If we don't have these hard shadows, then we're not going to get that spotlight look. You could even, if you wanted a really, really spotlight look, you could use something like a Source 4 Lico, which is basically what you use as a spotlight in theater situations. Those lamps are awesome. You would need one that has a tighter beam angle, but I think that the easiest thing for most people would be to use whatever lamp they have, especially if it's a Bowens mount, and a Fresnel and barn doors. If you're using tungsten lights, like a Arri 650 or so, that will already most likely have barn doors and will have the Fresnel built into it, so you should be good to go. So that's what we're looking at to actually get this light onto the wall, onto our subject, and we don't care that it's almost a little low. We do want to not have our barn doors cut too much off the bottom because we do want to get the light on the floor as well, but here's the thing, we need to have some fill light coming in to open up these shadows a little bit, otherwise this would be a lot harder of an image. If this light was really hard and we didn't have any fill light, it probably would look more something like this. I've just adjusted the contrast and made it so that there's not really any detail in these shadows anymore. It would look something more like this. And that while it maybe actually leans towards the spotlight look, it's not what we're looking for here because we want to be able to see the rest of the scene around him. We want to be able to see his birds, and we want to make sure that we can see the guitar, and we want to see the whole scene here, even if our spotlight look is focusing us back onto him. So there's a couple different things you could do here. I would say that the best way to get a lot of potential light back into this scene is use something like an octabox that's kind of just a little bit off angle between the two walls that he may be facing over on the left of our frame, outside of our frame, would allow you to get a little bit more light back in here. Now note that there's no edge light or anything like that, so we're not trying to put something over here up above him to separate him from the background. What separates him from the background is the level of brightness and sharpness that creates contrast between him and the background itself. The background here isn't as sharp in terms of the fidelity of these objects that are all around him. And then his brightness clearly contrasts him with the background. Even where we have a little bit of a shadow look right here, that's then contrasted against the lighter part of the background right here. Because this light's coming across, we are seeing the shadow right here from the guitar actually blotted out a little bit by his shadow, and most of that shadow is falling on the desk before it reaches into the wall. If you're having trouble with the shadow falling on the wall just because of the spacing you have, you can raise that light up just a little bit, and that should push it back down slightly. But we do see the shadow on the desk right here, and it's pretty much straight across in my opinion. So we can use an octabox to bring back some of that light and fill in these as if it's light that's bouncing around the room from this window light over here. Even more so, you could take a bounce card. This could be a pizza box, it could be a bead board, it could be a poster board, whatever you have as a bounce. It could be a 5-in-1 reflector. I always love those because they have the white side as well as the 4 other options, and use that to bounce some of this light from this setup right here back in as well. I would be very cautious to put it on the other side of the Fresnel and the lamp here, because we aren't really getting anything back here. The light is falling off before we get back here, and if I put it on this side, we might get spill on the back here. I like if we're just on the other side of the lamp, just right here, and that might wrap the light too much around and have too much soft light there. I really want it to be hard light that's falling on him and some soft light from an octabox that's filling the rest of the room. The octabox here with a little bit of a bounce is probably the cheapest way to do it, and this bounce will help gather some of the light from the barn doors as well as this octabox and bounce it back into his face. You could keep this pretty low as well if you wanted to, but you could also, you know, do something as simple as bouncing it off the wall, especially if you don't have an octabox. You could just take another lamp and bounce it off the corner of this wall right here, and that would get light back into your subject as if it was bouncing around the room without needing to have another bounce, without needing to have the octabox or anything like that. That's a really simple way to do this. I'd say you don't want this light to be super high above, bouncing down and then across or anything like that. That creates more of a directionality to it, because the light is coming so straight across here. Just kind of keeping everything straight across, in my opinion, works better for something like this. But the main idea with this bounce path is that we want it to be going behind, you know, this first layer is what we see, and then we want it to be going into that second layer, which is the far side of him. So our goal is something like that, and then, you know, the same kind of idea here. The nice thing with the octabox over here is that you have a good amount of spread, but you also are controlling the light a little bit. It's not just going everywhere, and you can use things like the dimmer on the lamp combined with the octabox to help you out. In this case, you're much more at the whim of how the light is bouncing around the room and the color of the walls that you have here. Because at the top of the frame it gets so dark and the right side of the frame it gets so dark, I don't think you necessarily need something like a space light to bring overall global illumination to this space unless your lamp is really not that powerful. And if you have the opportunity to use a lantern instead of an octabox, you could use a lantern here, and that would create a lot more of an omnidirectional look to it. Like I said, I like having it be a little bit directional, so that you kind of have a little bit of a sense of control over how that light is bouncing, as opposed to using just a lantern or something like this, where you're bouncing it off the wall itself. But this is a relatively simple setup here. We have a lamp, a barn door, and a Fresnel, and then we have another lamp with either, you know, nothing, that we're just bouncing it off the wall, or we're using a bounce card in an octabox or a lantern, you know, something to help spread our light out and make it pretty diffuse, because we don't want to have any edges really from the diffused light. We just want it to be filling in these shadows enough to get detail, while not competing at all with that spotlight look. If you think about it in a theatrical sense, if you go to a play, they usually have a bank of lights that are kind of generally illuminating the stage so you can see the background and that kind of stuff just a little bit. And then you have that spotlight that's additional to those, so it's cutting the person out of the environment that they're in without that environment being generally completely blacked out or completely illuminated. And that's the thing that I'm looking for here, so that we can keep our focus on our subject. And these are two different ways to do that. I think the big thing here is understanding that we want the light to be relatively low. We want it to be straight across to get this certain type of spotlight look that really makes him glow, while looking very different from a lot of other contemporary paintings in that way. And the sharpness of that light makes it look like he's frozen in motion, which makes him look very lively. It's as if you shot a really high shutter speed photo, where you stopped the motion because of the shutter speed. And we're using that light to have a focus on the fabric and the ripples of the fabric itself. And that helps with that overall kinetic feeling of him moving and, you know, kind of like crouch hugging his guitar as he tunes it, and this stylistic feel that you can get from him in this moment of almost like private performance. He's not actually on stage, but you can almost get the sense that he's on stage in his head. He's in front of the audience, and we are that audience viewing him. And so while the setup is relatively simple, the reasons why we're doing it, how we're doing it, those are really thought out so that we can get the feeling and sense that we want for an image like this. And that's usually how things are. Lighting can be difficult. Lighting setups can be huge and complex and all this kind of stuff, but all of them would fall apart if we didn't have reasoning and thought put into them for why we're doing it and what we need. And one reason I like, you know, talk about these micro budget setups too, is I'm talking about how can we get to the base needs of a scene without having it be this huge, expensive, labor intensive, you know, equipment intensive setup, but we're still getting the core feelings out of it. And in some cases, having a bigger setup, having more things would give you more, you know, latitude, range to work, whatever. Sometimes different gear, more expensive gear would give you a easier time setting up or make it faster, make it more convenient, whatever. But what I'm mostly talking about here is how are we trying to strive for feelings in the art that we're creating, and especially how do we then talk about that from the art that we are also influenced by? How do we look at things and say, ooh, I like that part. That's what leads me to feel this way about it. How do I incorporate that into my own art? And these are the conversations that I love to have while making lighting diagrams and talking about reference images. I think they're really important for artists, especially as filmmakers and photographers who might be inspired by lots of different art all around us. How do those pieces of art influence the work that we make? And so that wraps us up for this one. If you want to get my Filmmaker Tools template, like I said, that's available in the link down in the video's description. If you want to join my Patreon, I have free and paid tiers that start at just $2. Thank you so much to everybody who's gone over there and joined already. I really appreciate your support. And if you want to just join as a free member, that's a great way to find out when I release new videos. If you want to see more videos like this one as lighting diagrams, or watch cinematography videos about micro-budget filmmaking, cinematography, lighting, and all sorts of other filmmaking-based topics, you can subscribe. I'm striving for 1,500 subscribers, and I'd love to have you there as well. If you did like this, please give it a like. That helps me reach new viewers. And most importantly, I hope you have a great week ahead of you. Take care of yourselves, take care of people around you, take care of your community. There's lots of wild things going on in the world right now. And if you can be a source of support and kindness for somebody that you know, please do it. It would mean the world to them, and probably would end up meaning the world to you as well. And as always, I hope you have a great day. Peace.